And no, this isn't an overt type of power or strength that allows one to vanquish their enemies, but that doesn't make it any less impactful or important. Alright, so I wanted to talk about the idea of strong female characters because I think our definition of strong is already pretty narrow and only getting narrower. I also think there's a bit of revisionist history going on with some of these female characters that we used to idolize, and from a more personal standpoint, I just know that some of these characters that are now getting dragged through the mud really had a profound impact on me. And I think that the ways in which they influenced their respective stories are getting completely overlooked and disregarded in favor of more overt, in-your-face influencing. But before I get into this topic, I just want to say that I do think that the effort to tell more stories with women at the forefront is, in theory, a good thing. I mentioned this in my trilogy of videos about representation, but diversifying the types of stories that we tell allows us to explore different themes, messages, lessons, and principles that could have the potential to impact audiences in ways that we haven't really seen before. And so I advocate for the telling of more female-led stories, because I think these stories have the potential to illuminate different aspects of our individual and collective experiences, both from a male and female perspective. That being said, the reason that I said in theory is because I think that our current method of addressing this issue is doing more harm than good, which is basically the same point that I was making about representation. Again, just like with representation, I think that the focus should always be on the integrity of the story and not necessarily on making an ideological character for a specific demographic. But again, I already made 3 videos about this issue, so I won't rehash those same arguments here. All that being said, for the aforementioned reasons concerning messages, lessons, and principles, I would like to see a world with more female-led stories. And I think the claims about how too few movies have featured female leads are 100% substantiated. What I don't think is substantiated, though, is the claim that the female characters of the past were portrayed as nothing more than weak and feeble damsels in distress, always deferring to the male character or needing that male character to save them. I think this perspective is disrespectful to those female characters and completely overlooks the impact that they had on their respective stories and on their male counterparts. I think this is an extremely reductionist view of these characters that strips them of all of their nuance and agency and sees them only as their role in the story. The love interest, the side character, the comedic relief, etc., rather than as the fully fleshed out three-dimensional character whose actions and presence palpably affect the narrative and the story's main protagonist. Now, of course, I have not seen every movie ever made, and so I have to concede that there are definitely movies out there where it is absolutely the case that the primary female character is nothing more than an object to be saved, or just eye candy for the male characters, or even just completely irrelevant to the story. And so yeah, I would also like to see a reduction in the production of these types of movies. However, the reason I'm making this video is because I've seen plenty of articles and videos deconstructing the female characters in movies that I have seen, in which they argue that because they were just the love interest and not the main characters actually defeating the story's antagonists, they were essentially weak and powerless in these stories, and this is why we need the strong female leads of today so that we can rectify these past mistakes. I think one of the greatest examples of this is the character of Mary Jane Watson from Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man trilogy. Now, it is true that Mary Jane had to be saved from the bad guys a lot throughout this trilogy, and so many have started to address the perceived damsel in distress trope that these movies allegedly perpetuate. And in so doing, they have, in my opinion, completely dehumanized Mary Jane and turned her into nothing more than an object or a role in a movie, instead of seeing her as the character that she was, the character that had such a profound impact on the hero of the story. Don't forget that Mary Jane goes through her own roller coaster of a story arc in these movies. She goes from making it out of a broken home, to working a brutal 9-to-5 just to survive, to realizing her dreams, to realizing that her dreams weren't all that they were made out to be, to losing her dreams, to then meeting the man of her dreams, only to subsequently throw all of that away so that she could be with the guy who has always supported her emotionally, and so on. You could legitimately write a detailed analysis of all of the themes, lessons, and principles that were explored just within her story arc alone. But of course, these movies are about Spider-Man, and so we also need to examine how her presence influenced the main character. And when we do this, we begin to see just how integral she was to this story, because it was thanks to Mary Jane that Peter finally understood what his Uncle Ben was trying to teach him about great power and great responsibility. It was thanks to Mary Jane that after losing his powers, Peter was able to understand what he needed to do and who he needed to be in order to regain his powers and save the day. And it was thanks to Mary Jane that Peter was able to drag himself away away from the dark path he was treading, reconcile with his enemies, and rise to the occasion to take down the bad guy. Throughout these movies, it is the presence of Mary Jane that allows Peter to act as a hero. Whenever he is losing his way, it is because of Mary Jane that he is able to find his way back. And so yes, I understand that she had to be saved a lot throughout these movies, but to diminish her to nothing more than a damsel in distress because of that completely ignores the power and influence that she holds within the story. And I think it's a disservice to the character to overlook this effect simply because she isn't the one taking down the bad guy. What up, Editor Fief here. So I just want to be very explicit because the character of Mary Jane in the Raimi trilogy is a very contentious topic, and rightly so. I do not believe that she is a perfect character. I think there are a lot of flaws with this character, one of them being the fact that she has to be saved a ridiculous amount of times. My only point here is that this doesn't diminish the fact that she is a fully fleshed out three-dimensional character who has to go through her own personal struggles and overcome. The fact that she has to be saved doesn't reduce her to nothing more than a damsel in distress. That is the only notion that I'm speaking against here. There's a great video from a channel called Implicitly Pretentious where he breaks down the character of Mary Jane within Sam Raimi's trilogy. And while I don't agree with all of his conclusions about this character, I do think it serves to highlight the fact that within this world, she is not just a damsel in distress or just an object in a love triangle. There are things that she is constantly dealing with and overcoming within her own narrative. And yes, she makes mistakes and does things that absolutely deserve to be called out, as the fandom has made it a point to do. But in my opinion, those flaws only add to the realism of the character. And I'm of the opinion that the fact that she has to overcome all of these trials and tribulations within her own narrative while also dealing with the many flaws in her character is what makes her strong, even though she's not the one defeating the Green Goblins and the Dr. Octopuses or any of the other villains in the trilogy. And I think that there are certain acts, certain gestures that she performs that highlight that strength. But we'll get to that bit a little later. But in any case, for now, I just wanted to clear that up because I feel like it was still a little ambiguous as to what specifically I was calling out here. But anyway, with all that said, let's get back to the video. I think another great example of the diminishing of a female character simply because they weren't the ones actually doing the fighting is Arwen from The Lord of the Rings. Arwen is another pivotal character who is now seen as insignificant and weak just because she wasn't the one who was actually out there killing orcs and balrogs. And it's truly a shame because without Arwen, the literal entire race of man falls into oblivion. Don't forget that all the elves had given up on mankind. Justifiably so, by the way. Elrond, Galadriel, Gil-galad, etc. were all ready to sail away to Valinor, aka the Undying Lands, and leave men to their fate. But Arwen was the only one who had faith. And yes, that faith was anchored in Aragorn, but it wasn't only placed in him. And if it wasn't for Arwen literally sacrificing her chance at eternal life in bliss so that she could stay and fight alongside mankind, the Fellowship would have never succeeded. Aragorn would have never received the reforged shards of Narsil, wouldn't have been able to conscript the Ghost Army, and wouldn't have won the Battle of the Pelennor Field. Not to mention that at several points where Aragorn's strength and resolve faltered, it was Arwen who brought him back and showed him what he needed to do. So no, Arwen was not the main character, but she also wasn't some passive bystander just sitting there waiting for her knight in shining armor to come back. I'm sorry, but this is such a shallow and reductive take on her character and her impact on this story. And it takes her entire character arc and personal struggle and reduces all of that to just the love interest. And I'm sorry, but I just think that this is really disrespectful to these characters. And this revisionist history actively ignores the agency and influence that they had over their respective narratives. Because in these two characters, I think there's an unspoken power being alluded to. And that is the power to inspire growth, resolve, fortitude, courage, and sacrifice in the characters that they allow into their realm of influence. And no, this isn't an overt type of power or strength that allows one to vanquish their enemies. But that doesn't make it any less impactful or important. And this power doesn't only flow in one direction from female to male. Films like Titanic and more recently Wonder Woman anchored this power in the male love interest. In Titanic, Jack inspires Rose to buck the pressures of society and pursue her own dreams in life. While in Wonder Woman, Steve Trevor demonstrates to Diana the nobility still left in humankind, giving her the resolve to reject the film's main antagonist's philosophy that mankind is inherently evil, vile, and destitute. And I just think it's important to acknowledge this power, whether it's exhibited in a male or female character. Otherwise, we will continue to define power and strength through a very narrow and, quite frankly, male-centric lens. No, power isn't always just having the strength to defeat your enemies. There is so much strength in Mary Jane's decision to leave a life of luxury and comfort to be with Peter Parker in his broken down one-bedroom apartment, knowing that this decision will put her life at risk. There is so much strength in Arwen's decision to sacrifice a life of eternal bliss and stand up to her entire race in order to remain faithful to a cause and conviction that most considered to be lost or futile. And failing to see the strength in these actions means that as we attempt to create new, strong characters, we will diminish the importance and the significance of the many other types of strength. And on a more personal note, I just want to reiterate that some of these female characters had a profound impact on me. I still remember the "I've always been in your doorway" scene, and how even as a kid that scene punched me in the heart, because imagine sacrificing the love you cherish most in the world in order to protect the person responsible for that love, only to have that person later come to your door and tell you that even if it puts their life in danger, even if they lose all their material comforts, they would still rather be with you. Dude, the power in that gesture is indescribable. Peter isn't only sacrificing for Mary Jane, she is also very clearly sacrificing for him. And yes, this scene has deeply influenced my understanding and conceptualization of love, because I feel like now I'm just trying to build myself up to the point where I can also stand in someone else's doorway. And that conviction is all thanks to Mary Jane, not Spider-Man. And I can say the same about Arwen in The Lord of the Rings. I always think back to Aragorn's coronation, where he sees Arwen again for the first time since the Fellowship set out from Rivendell. Keep in mind that in his mind, he thought he was never going to see her again. We, the audience, repeatedly saw her in Rivendell throughout the trilogy, going through her own individual struggles. But for Aragorn, she's on a ship, sailing away to the Undying Lands, never to be seen again. And don't forget, Aragorn also tried to pull a Peter Parker and sacrifice his love for her so that she could be safe and free to live her best life without him. And so imagine seeing the person that you love the most in this world after you thought you were never going to see them again, because staying in this world with you would literally mean the death of them. Imagine the moment of realizing that that person chose you instead of a life of literal eternal bliss. Again, the sheer magnitude of that gesture, the strength of Arwen's conviction is immense. And so again, thanks to Arwen, that is an action that I cannot separate from my definition of love. And so yeah, these women have had a clear, measurable impact on me and my convictions. And so I can't lie that I took it somewhat personally when I saw them being denigrated in articles and videos just because they weren't the quote-unquote heroes of their stories. And outside of media, I feel like there are women in my personal life who embody some of these traits that I now aspire to thanks to these female characters. And the idea that they are weak or feeble because of it is, in my opinion, entirely disrespectful. No, they're not out here defeating their opponents or vanquishing their enemies or displaying strength in overtly masculine ways that we probably place a little too much value in as a society. But to infer that they're not strong because of this is extremely narrow-minded, again, in my opinion. I just think that we'd be better served if we highlighted and uplifted all of these different understandings of strength and power and encouraged everybody, both male and female, to aspire to them. So yes, dudes, I think we should aspire to be more like Mary Jane and Arwen. Or if that's too much of a jump for some of us, maybe try to be more like Jack from Titanic or Steve Trevor from Wonder Woman. And no, I don't think that this means that we should seek to dismantle the more overt concepts of strength either. These notions still have their place within society, and we should still aspire to these ideals, both men and women alike. However, I think we definitely need to be wary of seeking to define this concept of strength as the only concept of strength, so that when we try to create strong characters in the future, whether it's a strong female lead or not, that character won't have to fit into the increasingly narrow definition of what it means to be strong. But anyway, I think that's going to be it for this one. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear me out. I'm not a scholar or a critic or an academic or of any classification or discipline that warrants respect, so my opinions literally hold no weight. And so I can't thank you enough for just being willing to listen to me. In any case, I do hope this made sense. And as always, if it didn't, please feel free to let me know so that I can try to address any misconceptions in the comments. But with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.